Kao Cen Darach was a Jedi Battlemaster at a time when the title actually meant something. After the Battle of Ruusan, Battlemaster was an appointed position, the head lightsaber instructor at the Jedi Temple, an academic, not a warrior. Prior to Ruusan, the title of Battlemaster was earned on the battlefield, through blood, sweat, and tears. They were highly sought after as instructors, for their learning came from experience, not just a textbook. The principles of Kao Cen Darach set him at odds with the establishment on Coruscant, so he was often assigned far from the core as a field agent. Possibly by his own request, he was stationed at the Republic military outpost above Korriban, where he instructed Padawan Satele Shan about the dangers of the dark side. There they remained until 3,699 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Sith Empire returned from exile and invaded the Republic. Korriban was one of the first worlds attacked, seized before the Republic at large was even aware of the invasion, which might have proceeded unopposed for longer if not for the efforts of Darach and Shan. While Satele fled the station aboard the smuggling vessel of Nico Okar and accompanied by the Republic officer Jace Malcolm, Darach remained behind to cover their retreat, engaging the Sith Lords Vindican and Malgus. Though he managed to subdue Vindican, Kao Cen Darach was subsequently overpowered and slain by Malgus. Satele Shan made it back to Coruscant, and the previous secrecy of the Sith invasion was lost. For his failure, Vindican was immediately executed by Malgus, who claimed his mantle as a Sith Lord in the traditional fashion. Satele Shan would go on to become Jedi Grand Master, ensuring that the significance of Darach's sacrifice was never forgotten, while Darth Malgus would follow up this first Jedi kill with many more. Asajj Ventress was the child of warlords on Ratatak, left orphaned by the endless conflicts. A latent Force sensitive, she was taken in by the shipwrecked Jedi Kai Narek, who trained her as his apprentice. The two Jedi became crusaders of justice, taking the fight to the warlords, who put aside their differences to contain this threat to their power. Narek was killed in battle, and an enraged Ventress gave in to her lust for vengeance, embracing the dark side. It was during the weeks preceding the Clone War that Count Dooku came to Ratatak in search of a warrior lieutenant, and Ventress presented herself to him. With the military backing of the nascent Confederacy of Independent Systems, Ventress conquered Ratatak, and as Dooku's primary Dark Jedi apprentice, she was provided with rudimentary training in the Sith arts. Though left with standing orders to eliminate Anakin Skywalker, notably engaging him on Yavin 4, it was instead Skywalker's master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who became the subject of Ventress's obsession. It would be in her pursuit of Obi-Wan that she would run afoul of Anakin on Coruscant, discovering his secret marriage to Senator Padme Amidala. Skywalker unleashed his rage and manhandled Ventress with telekinesis, entangling her in electrified cables and dropping her into the Coruscant underlevels, apparently killing her. Ventress managed to survive and return to Dooku, who sent her to a medical facility on Boz Piti to recuperate. She spent the closing months of the war in a Bacta tank, until Boz Piti was invaded by the Republic. During the battle, Kenobi entered the facility and was confronted by Dooku and Ventress. Dooku stepped aside while Ventress hurled herself at Kenobi. Their duel took them out onto the battlefield where Skywalker joined in. However, pursuing Kenobi had taken Ventress too far away from the Separatist evac point, and Dooku was unwilling to allow Ventress to be captured, and ordered her gunned down. Ventress simply sold out Dooku by providing the Republic with intelligence on his plans, then used a Sith meditation to halt her bodily functions and fake her death. Her body was loaded onto a Republic medical shuttle for burial on Coruscant, but Ventress revived mid-flight and hijacked the ship. Her subsequent fate is unknown. My analyses of Kao Cen Darach will reference multiple academic sources, such as the Jedi Path, the Journal of Gnost-Dural, and the Old Republic Encyclopedia, but it is primarily extrapolated from his lone media appearance, the Return cinematic trailer. As should be obvious, my analyses of Asajj Ventress will be based purely upon classic Legends material, most notably the Clone Wars microseries and the Dark Horse comics, excluding her appearances in the Clone Wars animated series and all of its tie-ins, particularly the new canon novel Dark Disciple. To summarize, Ventress in Legends was effectively Dooku's pet serial killer, a deeply disturbed individual who would have been a natural fit for NBC's Hannibal. By contrast, Ventress in Canon was a weak pantomime villain jumping from one parental substitute to the next, spending most of her run as a disposable lackey to whichever master she happened to be serving, and when she finally did step up and start calling her own shots, she got herself horrifically murdered. In essence, the writers of TCW got Ventress's character ass backwards, stripped her of her iconic weapons, stripped her of her iconic appearance, then killed her off in a crappy harlequin romance novel. To hell with that, Legends all the way. And with that bloody noise out of the way, let us proceed with Kao Cen Darach versus Asajj Ventress. A Zabrak male, Kao Cen Darach's exact age at the time of his death has not been established, though my estimate is that he was approximately 40 years old. Indigenous to Iridonia, the Zabrak were a warrior race renowned for their hardiness, boasting 2 hearts and outwardly distinguished by their horned scalps and customary facial tattoos. A fairly typical specimen, Darach was built like an athlete and towered over Satil Shan. The Jedi Guardian Crix Sunburris outlined his personal training regimen in the Jedi Path as 1 hour of running, 1 hour of unarmed combat drills, and 1 hour of lightsaber practice. As a battlemaster, Darach likely followed a similar regimen. As a physical combatant, his primary traits were agility and dexterity, leveraged through his use of combat parkour and precision blade work. His skills with dual sabers indicated his ambidexterity. His stamina was respectable but unexceptional. He held out against the Sith long enough to subdue Vindican, but lacked the energy to confidently re-engage Malgus, instead attempting to overwhelm this adversary with telekinesis. When attacked by Malgus, Darach's fatigue meant that his effectiveness was reduced, but he was not helpless. Ultimately, it was his inability to contend with Malchus's sheer physical might that led to his defeat. This isn't to say that Darach was devoid of strength, as he was capable of handling a full-sized saber staff with one hand. It was simply his least developed attribute. As the first Jedi to fall in the Great Galactic War, Darach didn't live through the war. He was a peacetime Jedi, and he chose to wear combat armor, which spoke to his role as a combat specialist. The base layer was a brown skin-tight bodysuit, over which he wore plated greaves, thigh guards, a codpiece, chest piece, and gauntlets, with his overrobe no doubt concealing pauldrons and backplates. The plates demonstrated a reasonable level of lightsaber resistance, though the bodysuit wasn't nearly so resilient. The exaggerated armor sets featured in SWTOR gameplay notwithstanding, Darach's set was about as heavy as Jedi armor got. Jedi martial arts were generally based around flexibility and speed, and when forced to choose between mobility and protection when designing their armor, they always favored mobility. In Darach's case, there were substantial gaps between the plates, his midsection being completely exposed, and as the bodysuit lacked the distinctive quilted ribbing, I don't think it was made of armor weave. Though his armor provided a margin for error, Kao Cen Darach's success was ultimately due to his ability to keep his adversaries at arm's length and dismantle them. Though quite tough, he lacked the muscle mass to engage in slugging matches. A Radataki female, Asajj Ventress's exact age during the Clone Wars was never established, though she was clearly quite young, no doubt still in her 20s. Indigenous to Radatak, the Radataki were a humanoid species distinguished by their pale skin and total lack of body hair, and were infamous for their brutal warrior culture. Ventress was athletically built, distinguished by the 6 black slash tattoos on either side of her head, a death count of rival warlords. As a physical combatant, Ventress's primary attributes were agility and dexterity, leveraged through her nimble gymnastics and her handling of dual blades. Her efficient moveset reinforced her stamina, and she was tough enough to shrug off some pretty nasty hits, continuing to fight after being battered against the stone walls of the Yavin Temple. However, her emphasis on dexterity was forced by her lack of strength. Despite her hardiness, Ventress cannot handle a slugging match, simply because she can't hold her ground, which allowed Anakin Skywalker to overpower her defenses on multiple occasions. Ventress's choice of wardrobe reflected how she chose to deal with this. Instead of adopting armor, she chose a form-fitting Sullustan leather jumpsuit. Instead of trying to tank hits, she relied on evasion, with the jumpsuit protecting against the abrasive battlefield while leaving her unencumbered. She completed the outfit with heavy boots and gloves, while a combat skirt obscured her profile. However, Ventress's weaknesses were just as apparent. Though the bodysuit was practical on the battlefield with a maximum range of motion, it provided no actual protection. Ventress wasn't fragile, and her speed made her a formidable aggressor, but she was no tank. Asajj Ventress's success was ultimately predicated on her ability to keep opponents at bay and off balance. As physical specimens, Darach and Ventress were extremely similar, despite being members of totally different species. Both were delicate gymnasts whose success was predicated on leveraging their agility to keep opponents at arm's length, the difference being that Darach would simply give way before his adversaries rather than try and resist them, where Ventress rushed in to get the first hit, staggering her opponents backwards before they had a chance to do anything. Their approaches are a good foil for one another, and their performance levels are comparable. As a Zabrak in armor, Darach is significantly more resilient than Ventress, and better suited for slugging matches, despite not being a heavy hitter himself. However, though this advantage would cause Ventress some difficulties, forcing her to whittle Darach down, it doesn't provide him with a conclusive edge. Both are delicate duelists, making this fight an endurance run, not a slugging match, and Ventress has better stamina. To be fair, Darach would not burn out against Ventress nearly as quickly as he did against Malgus, as Ventress isn't capable of pounding on him with that level of intensity, but the final result would still be the same. Asajj Ventress gets the edge for physical ability. Kao Cen Darach's lightsaber followed the same design as that of Ben Zalo. A heavy-duty weapon, the hand grip on the lower end and the controls on the upper end were both recessed into the hilt, and the throttle-style activator was mounted on the central segment, which no doubt contained the crystal chamber, and the emitter was fitted with a rounded shroud. The lightsaber projected a green plasma blade, likely filtered through an Adegan crystal, as Ilum crystals wouldn't come into popular usage for millennia. Overall, the lightsaber was rugged and versatile, a reliable tool for a Jedi Battlemaster. The basic prerequisite for the title of Battlemaster was mastery of all 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat, providing Darach with a vast library of techniques to draw from. With his skillful mixing and matching of these various techniques, he aligned with the moderation form in function, if not in fact. Nyman, Form 6 lightsaber combat, the most balanced and versatile of the 7. Furthermore, aspects of his technique indicate a preference for Ataru, the aggression form, the most acrobatic and elaborate lightsaber form. My personal belief is that Darach started out as an Ataru specialist, gradually expanding his skill set, with Naiman becoming the culmination of his training, the focal point for his skill. A mixture of the two would temper the inherent overcommitment of Ataru, while lending the more delicate Naiman some teeth. A dynamic physical combatant, Darach used acrobatics and gymnastics as the fulcrum for quite direct blade work. But despite fighting with his entire body, his overall style was delicate and loose, simply coasting on momentum rather than actively propelling himself. His blade work was simple but highly diversified. When attacking, he has employed push cuts with the edge of his blade, slashes with the tip, thrusts, and some blade binding. For defense, he favored striking deflection parries and acrobatic evasions, with the occasional static block. Though he chose to wield a simple, functional lightsaber, Darach was familiar with various weapon types and combos. He demonstrated his skill with dual lightsabers against the Sith, and instructed Satele Shen in the use of the saber staff. When forced to improvise and wield a saber staff and lightsaber side by side, he adapted his approach to take advantage of the extra blade, using trikata tactics to blindside the opponent and allow for easier wielding. What this truly demonstrated was his total knowledge of the lightsaber and all of its possible applications. His tactical approach was essentially a fighting retreat, harassing opponents and goading them into pursuing him, then using active defense to subvert their guard and open them up for devastating single-hit counters. Darach has taken an offense-oriented technique composed almost purely of striking moves and adapted it for defense, using attacks as deflection parries or as warding strikes. This approach was further supplemented by his fluid integration of telekinetic strikes. Kao Cen Darach's tactics were based around following the path of least resistance, penetrating the opponent's defenses with a feather touch rather than a heavy hand. He would keep his adversary at arm's length, lightly dancing just outside of their attack range, while tripping them up with probing counters. He was most successful when able to avoid direct contests of strength, instead deflecting and subverting the opponent, but conversely, he was poorly suited for slugging matches. Furthermore, though he was capable of sustained fighting for lengthy periods of time, he was not Obi-Wan Kenobi and would eventually tire. This limitation led to his defeat at the hands of Malgus. Too lacking for energy to resume his acrobatic evasions, he had no way to combat the Sith apprentice's brute strength, and Darach was simply overpowered. However, it should be noted that even at this early stage, Malgus was a renowned Sith warrior, so falling in combat against such a capable opponent does not reflect poorly on Kao Cen Darach. At the end of the day, Darach brilliantly capitalized on his extensive knowledge of lightsaber combat, reconfiguring and adapting his style to combat two radically different fighter types while armed with an unconventional and demanding weapon set, and very nearly coming out on top. What he lacked in power, he made up for through ingenuity and nuance. Noted for her impressive lightsaber skills by Darth Sidious before her training with Count Dooku even began, Asajj Ventress was originally trained by Jedi Knight Kai Narek, who instructed her in the use of the traditional weapon of his order, with Ventress adopting dual blades after his death. Already an expert with this demanding weapon set, Ventress's skills were further elevated by Dooku's training in classical lightsaber techniques. In addition, Dooku also provided her with the unique specialist weapons that became iconic to Ventress, the conjoining set of curved fencing lightsabers originally constructed by Komari Vosa, projecting Sith bloodshine blades. I actually don't believe that Ventress studied classical Jarkai until her training with Dooku began, as it's a relatively obscure discipline that Kai Narek is unlikely to have known. A foundation in Ataru and Naiman is far more likely. the most acrobatic and elaborate lightsaber technique, and the most balanced and versatile, both among the most common in the Jedi Order. Many of her opponents commented on Dooku's obvious influence on her technique, indicating that she was almost certainly trained in Makashi, Form 2, the contention form, the most linear and refined lightsaber technique. In order to accommodate the twin blades and prevent them from tangling, Ventress employed wide circular sweeps and flourishes, using gymnastic rotations to maneuver the two weapons, but favoring quite relaxed movements and postures, relying almost entirely on dexterity over strength. She further diversified her style by incorporating thrusting attack sequences and blade binding techniques, allowing her to bypass and subvert the defenses of opponents. When maneuvering, she combined flanking acrobatics with more linear push-and-pull advances. In combat, Ventress would use one blade to set up for the other, using block and counter combinations when defending, or cross blocks to trap and control the opponent's blade, and using double attack sequences to subvert the opponent's defenses when attacking. The need to balance her awareness between two blades made her excellent at multitasking, and she smoothly integrated both hand-to-hand combat techniques and force abilities into lightsaber combat. However, like Dooku, her almost purely dexterity-based technique was poorly suited for combating more strength-oriented fighting forms, and her style was effectively crippled by the loss of one of her blades. As a fallback, Ventress would link the two weapons into a saber staff. Less refined, though more unorthodox, this weapon allowed her to marshal her strength and put more power into her blows. Additionally, the S-curve of the handle left the two blades offset, making it much tougher to defend against than a traditional saber staff, as she was able to change their relative positions by rotating the handle in her hand. In her tactics, Ventress again took many cues from Dooku, and was likely given the same speech that Dooku gave to Grievous.
If you're to succeed in combat against the best of the Jedi, you must have fear, surprise, and intimidation on your side. For if any one element is lacking, it would be best for you to retreat. You must break them before you engage them. Only then will you ensure victory and have your trophy.
However, where Dooku would continuously subvert opponents in order to take them down with as little effort as possible, Ventress instead took the path of General Grievous. Psychological warfare and intimidation break the opponent's composure with theatrical posturing and verbal taunts. Feint and ambush confuse the opponent's defenses with multi-pronged assaults and diversions. Shock and surprise change the rules of the engagement by cycling through the various techniques in her arsenal. In essence, subvert and overwhelm. Ventress was cunning and astute, but she was undermined by pride and wrath. She would sometimes go too far with the theatrical posturing and start outright gloating, which has given some foes the chance to rally and fight back. And the hatred and rage that was the source of her power left her easily provoked. Her composure was fragile, and she responded to compassion with violence. But behind it all was the scared little girl. When the rage was spent, all that was left was fear. Ventress was not above breaking and running, justifying her cowardice as cutting her losses. Essentially, Asajj Ventress combined the measured style and finesse of Count Dooku with the terror tactics of General Grievous. She was a jack of all trades, but all of her skills were developed to an extremely high level. Though she would crumble when put under enough pressure, it took Jedi Council Master level swordsmen to accomplish that. She put up a fight against Mace Windu and Dooku, contended with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker on an equal level multiple times, and defeated Kit Fisto. As far as rank-and-file Jedi Knights were concerned, Asajj Ventress was practically untouchable, something that Jai Maruk learned the hard way. In regards to skill configuration and core function, Darach and Ventress were, again, extremely similar. Both used gymnastics to set up for dexterity-based blade work, the difference being that Darach's acrobatics employed all three axes of rotation, where Ventress preferred to remain upright, relying more on her weapons than her body, hand-to-hand combat notwithstanding. Though Ventress's blade work was much simpler than Darach's, her use of tandem blades more than made up for this. Asajj Ventress's weapon set provides a significant advantage, allowing her to leverage her entire skill set in a way that Darach simply can't. That being said, given Darach's effectiveness against Vindican, Ventress's saber-staff technique is too unrefined to get her anywhere. The offset blades can only make up for so much. However, this element is unlikely to come up, as Ventress's Jarkai is perfectly sufficient. While I do consider Darach to be the better swordsman in regards to developed skill, Ventress's skill set is much more focused, incorporating techniques that provide the same functionality as Darach's, only better. Both used active defense to set up for counters, but only Ventress adapted this for offense, where Darach relied on defensive lapses on the part of the opponent. Though Ventress has proven vulnerable against these same techniques, Darach's style lacks the focus of Dooku's Makashi or Kenobi's Surisu. Instead, Darach would find the viability of his active defense drastically reduced against Ventress due to her experience against these fighters. Furthermore, though Ventress lacked Darach's subtle variation, she employed her various techniques with much more focus and commitment. Though Darach's slippery defensive approach is liable to frustrate Ventress, he doesn't employ active psychological warfare or emotional manipulation, so he won't truly get under her skin. Instead, his reactive approach would play into her hands, allowing her to take the initiative and dictate the terms of the engagement. Asajj Ventress gets the edge as a martial artist and lightsaber duelist. As I see it, Kao Cen Darach's development as a Force wielder was dictated not by his training background, but by the circumstances of his career. His rigid principles led to a contentious relationship with the political establishment, curbing any possible growth as a diplomat. Instead, he was relegated to field assignments, which would have led to a heavier emphasis on practical and combative abilities. Seen in this light, being named a Jedi Battlemaster was the natural culmination of Darach's development. As a physical combat specialist, it stands to reason that one of Darach's primary focuses would be the control branch, an aspect that his Zabrak physiological traits would naturally feed into, given his people's reputation for great physical discipline. In his enhancement of his physical performance level, he emphasized agility and reflex, which enabled his dynamic fighting style, though his strength enhancement was unexceptional. Furthermore, his reliance on lightsabers to defend against Force lightning indicated that he wasn't capable of combative Tutaminis. However, even though Darach didn't demonstrate any ability with Force heal, I wouldn't rule it out, as it's an extremely practical skill for a field operative, and quite common during that era. One of Kao Cen Darach's defining principles was his opposition to the dark side, and it's worth noting that Satele Shan's stated reason for studying under Darach was to learn of the dangers of that aspect of the Force. Though Shan was the first to sense the wave of darkness that heralded the Sith invasion, it was Darach who identified the attackers as Sith, demonstrating his acute perception. In fact, Shan speculated that Darach possessed the gift of farsight, requesting an assignment to Korriban because he had foreseen the coming storm. Such an advanced precognitive talent would no doubt carry over into battle, especially since various lightsaber techniques were performed as moving meditations that enabled such visions, though whether or not Darach did this is pure speculation. Kao Cen Darach's primary combative ability was telekinesis, and he boasted a wide range of applications. He demonstrated his multi-ton lifting strength when he pelted Malgus with a barrage of debris and engine components, and his fine control when he knocked aside one of Malgus's cleaves with a well-timed lightsaber throw, saving Satele Shan's life. He displayed an ability to penetrate passive telekinetic defenses when he hurled back Vindican with a force push, as well as bypassing such defenses with tactile telekinesis, staggering back Vindican and Malgus by channeling a force wave into the ground, using the terrain itself as a physical medium to leverage his power. Though Darach's own TK barrier was never tested, based on his demonstrated power and skill, I don't see him being ragdolled as easily as someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Supporting Darach's probable specialization in Nyman was his expert integration of his Force talents into lightsaber combat, wielding his powers as an opportunistic additional attack vector. He typically relied on telekinesis to subvert and repel adversaries, safeguarding allies and giving himself breathing room. Furthermore, he demonstrated an emphasis on using the opponent's energies against them when he used his lightsabers to redirect Vindican's Force lightning into Malgus. However, though lightsaber combat remained Darach's primary heavy hitter, he would unleash his full power against especially formidable opponents. Clearly fatigued after his marathon duel with Malgus and Vindican, he lacked the energy to confidently re-engage Malgus, who had gathered up his fallen master's weapon and was dredging up his rage in preparation for a final assault. Instead, Darach unleashed a barrage of thrown objects, seeking to end this fight before it began. Though his efforts were unsuccessful, they were no less impressive for it. Though he fell in battle, Kao Cen Darach did not die in vain, and his heroic reputation was well earned. Though her Jedi training under Kai Narek was effectively aborted by her master's death, the rigors of Ratatak clearly demanded quick learning, and Asajj Ventress was already a capable Force warrior. Embracing her rage, she developed into a self-trained dark side assassin, modeling herself after the Sith. This fascination would pay off when she was picked up by Sith apprentice Count Dooku, who provided her with rudimentary training in the Sith arts as the foremost of his dark acolytes. Though one of Dooku's most effective enforcers, Ventress was never formally inducted into the Sith, and remained a simple, albeit powerful, Dark Jedi. In her enhancement of her physical performance levels, Ventress emphasized agility and dexterity, outflanking opponents with dynamic superhuman acrobatics and darting around the battlefield with Force speed, though her strength enhancement was unexceptional. When she began training under Count Dooku, he taught her various Sith techniques that allowed her to control her bodily functions and biorhythm, allowing her to fake her death, and likely contributing to her survival on Coruscant. However, Dooku never trained her in Tutaminis, leaving her vulnerable against Force lightning, no doubt an engineered weakness in case Ventress got too uppity. During her crusade with Kai Narek, stories were told of her using mind tricks to control people's thoughts, and she impressed Count Dooku with her skill for Force concealment, quietly dispatching his host during his first visit to Ratatak. He helped her refine this ability with training in the Sith Kwei Tech meditation, which allowed her to conceal her Force signature even from powerful Jedi Masters. Obi-Wan Kenobi described the texture of her concealment as a subtly disturbing absence. During her confrontation with Kenobi on board the Titavian IV, Ventress used Beast Trick to take control of the Rancor he loosed, turning his own distraction tactic against him. An exceptionally skilled telekinetic, Ventress's lifting strength was several tons, demonstrated when she hurled a massive stone pillar at Anakin Skywalker on Yavin 4, while her fine control was shown when she pelted Skywalker with a barrage of flagstones plucked from the Massassi Temple. She also demonstrated a form of limited levitation when she engaged in a mid-air lightsaber duel with Dooku. Her ability to overcome TK barriers depended greatly on the opponent. She ragdolled Kenobi with Force grip and Force push regularly, where Skywalker could muster his strength and shoulder through her interference. The effectiveness of her own TK barrier was similarly varied. She was repelled by Skywalker's baseline Force push, but remained balanced and upright, where Dooku overpowered her with ease. Arguably, Ventress's most impressive and controversial power was her ability to animate dead bodies as puppet soldiers. Likely an example of the same Sith sorcery that created the Korriban zombies that guarded the Valley of the Dark Lords, it provides a reference for Ventress's degree of Sith training. Dooku evidently had no qualms about teaching her advanced Sith lore. He simply withheld any knowledge that would actually provide her with an edge against him. Moreover, her ability to accomplish this feat was extremely circumstantial, requiring a sufficient number of corpses, and was very likely fueled by the Dark Force aura created by the Omadun massacre. However, this feat was a perfect demonstration of Ventress's tactics of keeping opponents off balance by controlling the environment. With her impeccable integration of her Force talents into physical combat, Ventress wielded her powers extremely proactively. However, she only cut loose as a last resort, instead favoring maximum return for minimal effort. She slaughtered most of the gladiators in the cauldron on Ratatak through the judicious application of power, simply dislodging the stalactites above the arena floor with telekinesis. On Yavin 4, she manhandled and crushed Anakin Skywalker's clone troopers, and successfully blindsided him with thrown objects, though she did walk a fine line between simply goading him and actively provoking him. Ultimately, as skilled and focused as Asajj Ventress was, she simply could not contend with superior power in the Force. On Queta, she tussled with Master Fey, whom I would describe as the Star Wars universe's answer to Galadriel, and was disabled by her telepathy. Though to her credit, Ventress did come close to crushing Fey's heart with telekinesis. On Coruscant, an enraged Anakin Skywalker brutally manhandled Ventress with telekinesis, leaving her near death. And finally, Dooku made short work of her defenses on a regular basis, blasting her with Force lightning and tormenting her with telekinesis. However, for all her failings, Ventress was still a force to be reckoned with, a nuanced and powerful dark side adept. While Kao Cen Darach may have been advanced in his specific applications of the Force, he only demonstrated basic abilities, which indicated a pretty typical training background. By contrast, Ventress was brought up in a climate of violence that demanded high combat skill, and Dooku more than picked up the slack for Kai Narek, providing her with access to alternative Sith powers. Moreover, Ventress was simply more experienced at combating other Force wielders. While I won't rule out confrontations with the odd Dark Jedi, Darach was cut down before his time, and did not live through the war with the Sith. They displayed a comparable ability with physical enhancement and many of the same limitations, though Ventress could overclock her performance with active Force speed. Darach's lack of ability with Tutaminis doesn't factor in, as Ventress can't use Force lightning. Any skill Darach may possess with Curato Salva is purely speculative, while Ventress's Sith hibernation techniques simply improve her survivability when badly wounded. They don't provide any direct advantage. It is in the area of telepathy and mental interference where Ventress's more comprehensive knowledge base truly begins to shine. Her ability with Force concealment allows her to blindside opponents with hit-and-run ambushes, while her telepathic ability provides a demonstrated circumstantial advantage. By contrast, Darach's use of advanced precognition is purely speculative, and doesn't provide any advantage that Ventress wouldn't also enjoy. She is that talented. Their respective mastery of telekinesis is directly comparable, with many common applications and an equal level of magnitude. Furthermore, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Ventress's power to animate the dead provides the same slim circumstantial advantage as her telepathic abilities. I wish to state up front that I consider their power and skill levels to be exactly equal. Ventress simply has more powers. Additionally, she wielded them far more proactively, while using many of the same subversive tricks as Darach, but with a decidedly more lethal bent, greater initiative, and more damaging subversions. Her alternative powers demonstrate a skill set intended to account for even the most far-fetched situations, allowing her to exploit circumstantial factors and wield her surroundings as a weapon. Asajj Ventress gets the edge as a Force wielder. Between Kao Cen Darach and Asajj Ventress, Ventress is unquestionably the more viable combatant, with a veritable laundry list of advantages. Her better stamina leaves her better prepared for the endurance run that their confrontation is certain to be. Her fighting style is better optimized for dueling and heavily reinforced by her specialized weapons set, and she possesses a much more comprehensive skill set as a Force wielder, courtesy of Dooku's training. In essence, Asajj Ventress is an extremely proactive and aggressive swordswoman who uses many of the same tricks as Darach, and has additional tricks that Darach has no answer for. All that being said, I have to stress that for everything Ventress has going for her, Kao Cen Darach is merely at a disadvantage. He is not overmatched. Thanks to his robust physiology and armor, Ventress will have to whittle him down. One-shotting him is out of the question. Additionally, Ventress's dueling advantage is predicated on Jar Kai. If Darach should deprive Ventress of her extra blade, her effectiveness is halved, as her single saber technique is merely serviceable, and should Darach appropriate that extra blade, Ventress is completely screwed. And despite failing to match Ventress's breadth of skill with the Force, Darach successfully matches her power and her nuanced application. This battle is nothing less than a contest of equals, and Ventress truly has her work cut out for her. But ultimately, as formidable as Darach is, he is ironically held back by the same limitation as the Clone Wars era Jedi that Ventress hunted. He's a general combat specialist first, duelist second. Though an active lightsaber instructor who clearly participated in semi-regular sparring matches, his overall fighting style is designed for the battlefield. I consider Darach to be Ventress's superior in regards to developed skill, legitimately comparable to Obi-Wan Kenobi in his prime, but he isn't nearly as well optimized as she is. What Darach has to reconfigure his style into, Ventress's style was built to be in the first place. When the fight begins, Ventress would undoubtedly attack first, with Darach likely responding with the same evasive defensive posture that he used against Vindican. Ventress's greater agility and speed would make her more of a handful than Vindican was, but Darach would still be contending evenly. Instead, Ventress's advantage would be most apparent in her conduct. Darach is by no means inactive. After all, he was the one taking the initiative against the Sith. Ventress is simply more active. Every tactic and trick that Darach is liable to attempt, Ventress is more than likely to simply beat him to the punch. To be fair, Darach would give as good as he got, and would land some good hits in return, but Ventress would simply land more, gradually wearing him down. The point in the Yavin 4 duel where Anakin Skywalker was dredging up his rage is the point where Kao Cen Darach would be burning out. If Ventress simply kept up the pressure, she would inevitably overwhelm Darach as he slowed down. However, she has a persistent trend of stopping to gloat when things are going her way, which in this case would give Darach an opening to cut loose with his Force abilities, just as he did against Malgus. Ventress's approach to dealing with an opponent's powers has typically been preemptive strike, and when unsuccessful, tank the hit and retaliate immediately. And everything that Darach is bringing on, Ventress has endured. Darach's desperate last assault, instead of pulling victory out of the fire, would instead be a wake-up call for Ventress to stop pissing around and end it. And end it she would. I declare Asajj Ventress the victor.